The air in the courtroom felt thick, suffocating almost, as if the walls themselves were closing in on Elon Musk. His palms were slick with sweat, despite the cool temperature of the room. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. It wasn't just any lawsuit, this was a battle for his career, his legacy, and perhaps the very future of his companies. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the stern faces of the jury, the judgmental glares of reporters, and the cold, calculating expression on the judge's face. Elon sat at the defendant's table, his usual confident demeanor nowhere to be found. He ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous tic that had crept in over the past few weeks as the case progressed. He was no stranger to public scrutiny or high-stakes drama, but this was different. This wasn't about launching another rocket or unveiling a new car. This was about something far more personal, his integrity, his ability to deliver on his promises, and his commitment to his vision. The judge, a woman known for her ruthless efficiency and no-nonsense approach, was just about to make her ruling. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife, "the evidence presented here today has been damning. The actions of your companies have been reckless, and your statements have misled both the public and investors. I find it hard to believe that someone of your stature could not foresee the consequences of such actions." The words hit Elon like a punch to the gut. He had prepared for the worst, but the sting of the judge's condemnation still cut deep. This wasn't just a legal battle, it felt like a personal attack, an accusation that challenged everything he had worked for. His legal team shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, clearly sensing the dire situation. Elon could feel the tension in the room building to a boiling point. The judge's next words were even more damning. "You have proven time and again that your ambitions have often outweighed your responsibilities," she said, her gaze locking onto Elon. "And for that, you will pay." Elon's heart raced, his mind scrambling for a way out, some form of defense that could salvage the situation. But before he could respond, the judge slammed the gavel down. "Case dismissed. The ruling stands." The gavel's echo seemed to hang in the air long after the words had been spoken. The room erupted into whispers and murmurs, the tension palpable. Musk sat frozen, the weight of the decision sinking in. His lawyers shuffled papers and exchanged quick glances, but there was nothing they could do now. The judge had made her ruling, and it was final. The news cameras outside the courtroom were already buzzing with excitement. They'd caught the entire exchange. Elon Musk, once the darling of Silicon Valley, now the villain in a courtroom drama that would be broadcast across the world. The headlines would write themselves. But this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. As the room slowly began to empty, Elon remained seated, his mind racing. He had faced setbacks before. Failures, public scrutiny, even personal losses. But this time, it felt different. The consequences were bigger, and the people he had trusted were no longer in his corner. The judge's words echoed in his mind: reckless, misleading, responsibilities. He wasn't just fighting for his companies anymore. He was fighting for his legacy. His eyes flickered to the door, where the press was waiting to pounce, and then back to his legal team. They were already packing up, their faces grim. But Elon didn't feel defeated, not yet. In fact, a spark of something deep inside him began to ignite. A fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface for years, but which now threatened to consume him. He'd built empires from the ground up. He had faced the impossible and somehow come out on top. Why should this be any different? Elon stood up, his decision made. He wasn't going down without a fight. As he walked out of the courtroom, his mind raced with thoughts of what came next. What could he do now? How could he turn this around? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a question he had asked himself countless times in his life, but never more so than in this moment. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Walking through the corridor of the courthouse, he pulled out his phone. His inbox was flooded with messages, some from friends and family, others from investors and colleagues. But there was one message that stood out. It was from a trusted ally, someone who had been in his corner for years. You still have something to prove. Don't let them define you. We're with you. Elon's chest tightened as he read the message. It was exactly what he needed to hear right now. He wasn't alone in this fight. He never had been. He stepped outside into the crisp air, the sunlight momentarily blinding him as he squinted against the glare. The crowds had gathered outside the courthouse, their cameras trained on him. They were waiting for a reaction, for a sign that he was beaten. But there was no sign of defeat on Elon Musk's face. Instead, a new determination washed over him. The public thought they knew the story, but they didn't. They didn't understand the full picture, the real Elon Musk. And it was time for him to show them. He walked past the reporters without a word, his thoughts already shifting to the next move. It wasn't just about winning this case anymore. It was about something bigger, proving to himself, and to the world, that nothing would break his spirit. The road ahead was uncertain. The judge had burned him, but what came next? That was something even he couldn't predict. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. As he got into his car, the engine roared to life, and the world outside blurred. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had never been the typical tech mogul. His story wasn't one of smooth beginnings or inherited wealth. It was the tale of a young boy with a dream that seemed impossible at the time, but one that, against all odds, would eventually change the world. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon's early years were shaped by an environment that was as challenging as it was formative. His parents, May Musk, a model and dietitian, and Errol Musk, an electromechanical engineer, had a turbulent marriage that eventually ended in divorce. The separation left a mark on Elon, one that would shape his view of the world and his approach to business. He was a quiet, introspective child, often buried in books. While other kids were outside playing, Elon was reading about everything from science fiction to physics, developing an insatiable curiosity that would drive him throughout his life. At the age of 10, Elon developed a deep fascination with computers. It was during this time that he taught himself how to program, eventually creating a simple video game called Blaster. He sold it for a mere $500, but for a young boy, it was a glimpse into the potential of technology and entrepreneurship. It was a small success, but it was enough to plant the seed for a future far beyond anything he could have imagined. However, the road to success wasn't a smooth one. His teenage years were marked by bullying at school, a painful experience that would stay with him. Elon wasn't the kind of kid who fit in. He was different, and that difference often made him the target of others. He would later describe those years as lonely and tough, but in hindsight, he recognized that they were also a crucial period of growth. Those painful years would later fuel his relentless drive to prove himself, to not just his peers, but to the world. At the age of 17, Elon left South Africa and moved to Canada to attend Queen's University. His decision to leave was partly motivated by his desire to avoid mandatory military service in South Africa, where apartheid laws were still in place. But more than that, he was eager to escape the small, constrictive world of Pretoria and immerse himself in the broader, more liberal landscape of North America. From there, it was a quick transition to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. Elon's academic journey was a mix of intense focus and impatience. He wasn't interested in a conventional path, he wanted to make a difference in the world. And for that, he needed more than just a degree. He needed to build something. At the age of 24, Elon made one of the most pivotal decisions of his life. He dropped out of Stanford University after just 2 days of a PhD program. The reason? He had bigger plans. Plans that would take him to Silicon Valley, where he would ultimately co-found Zip2, an online city guide software. The company was a modest success, eventually being sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million. Elon's share? $22 million. Most people would have considered that a comfortable nest egg. But for Elon, it was just the beginning. He wasn't content with the status quo. He had far grander visions of the future, and he was just getting started. His next venture, X.com, a company he founded in 1999, was a bold attempt to revolutionize the online payment system. X.com would later become PayPal, which was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock. Elon walked away with $165 million from the deal, a fortune by any standard. But despite the financial success, he was never interested in the money. For him, it was always about the vision, the possibility of using technology to change the world in ways no one had imagined. While PayPal brought him wealth, it was his next set of ventures that would cement his legacy as one of the most ambitious and transformative figures in modern history. In 2002, Elon founded SpaceX, with the aim of making space travel cheaper and more accessible. His vision wasn't just to put satellites into orbit or to send astronauts to the International Space Station. He wanted to make humanity a multiplanetary species. A lofty goal, but then again, Elon had always aimed high. He was often criticized for his audacious goals. Many people thought SpaceX would fail, just as many had believed PayPal was destined for failure in its early days. But SpaceX defied the odds, launching the Falcon 1, the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit in 2008. Around the same time, he founded Tesla, a company dedicated to revolutionizing the automobile industry with electric cars. Again, many doubted him. Electric cars were seen as impractical, expensive, and inefficient. But Elon wasn't in the business of doing what was easy. He was in the business of changing the way the world worked. Tesla struggled in its early years, nearly going bankrupt in 2008, but Elon's commitment to his vision never wavered. He poured his own money into the company when it was on the brink of collapse. And just like SpaceX, Tesla eventually overcame its obstacles, leading to the company's meteoric rise. Today, Tesla is one of the most valuable car manufacturers in the world, and SpaceX has become a key player in the future of space exploration. Through it all, Elon Musk had faced personal challenges and public criticism. His relationships were often strained, particularly with his family. His father, Elon Musk, had been a distant and at times, cruel figure in his life, often clashing with Elon's idealistic and sometimes overbearing drive. Elon's mother, May, had been a constant source of support, but even their relationship was tested as his ambitions grew. His personal life became the subject of tabloid fodder, especially his marriages and divorces. Elon had been married 3 times, twice to actress Tallulah Riley, and his relationships often drew as much attention as his business ventures. Yet, despite the personal turmoil, Elon's focus remained unshaken. He had a goal, and nothing was going to stop him from achieving it. Now, sitting in the courtroom, Elon Musk was no longer just a tech entrepreneur. He was a global icon, a symbol of innovation, ambition, and risk-taking. But as he sat there, listening to the harsh words of the judge, he couldn't help but wonder if all of his accomplishments had led to this moment of reckoning. Had his single-minded pursuit of success clouded his judgment? Had he sacrificed too much in the name of progress? Elon's story was far from over, and the courtroom drama was just the beginning. But as he faced the harsh reality of the ruling, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come, from a lonely child in South Africa to a billionaire with the world at his feet. Yet now, it was no longer about the wealth or the fame, it was about something much bigger. It was about proving to the world, and to himself, that he was more than the mistakes of his past. That he could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Elon Musk was not going to back down. Not now, and not ever. The days following the courtroom ruling felt like a blur to Elon. The media was relentless, the headlines sensationalizing every aspect of the trial. Elon Musk burned in court, is his empire in jeopardy, read one headline. The fall of a tech titan, screamed another. It was a spectacle, one that had put him at the center of a storm of criticism and speculation. As he sat in his office at SpaceX, staring out the window, the weight of it all pressed down on him. The court ruling had been a shock to his system, but it was also a wake-up call. For the first time in his life, Elon felt as though his empire might actually crumble beneath him. His vision, everything he had built, was suddenly at risk. The people who had once admired him now questioned his judgment, and the investors who had supported him for years were growing uneasy. Elon had always been the one to take risks, the one who moved forward despite the naysayers. But now, for the first time, the risks felt like they might be too much. The ruling from the judge had been the first blow, but the aftermath was proving to be more devastating than he could have imagined. At SpaceX, his engineers were anxious, their conversations tense as they discussed the future of the company. There were rumors circulating that his legal troubles could affect their funding, or worse, that SpaceX could lose critical contracts. For a moment, Elon wondered if it was all slipping away. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the trial, every misstep, every word from the judge. Across town, Tesla's stock had taken a dive, as had the value of his other ventures. Investors were growing skittish, pulling back on their support, unsure of what was next for Elon Musk and his empire. For years, his name had been synonymous with innovation and success, but now it seemed like that reputation was crumbling faster than anyone could anticipate. Despite the chaos swirling around him, Elon refused to sit idly by. He wasn't one to let setbacks define him. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. This was more than just a legal issue, it was a matter of survival. He wasn't going to let this moment be his downfall. That evening, Elon called a meeting with his closest advisors. They gathered around the sleek conference table in the SpaceX headquarters, the weight of the situation hanging over the room like a dark cloud. The faces around the table were a mix of familiar, concerned expressions. There was Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, always steady and pragmatic, J.B. Straubel, Tesla's CTO, who had been with him since the early days, and a few of his top legal and financial advisors, all looking at him expectantly. "All right, what's the situation?" Elon began, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. Gwynne was the first to speak. "Elon, I won't sugarcoat it. The ruling has hit us hard. We're hearing whispers that some of our investors are getting nervous. The media is feeding into it, and that's only making the situation worse. We need to reassure them that SpaceX isn't going anywhere." Elon nodded, his mind already turning. "What's the plan?" "We need to make a statement," JB interjected. "Not just a press release, but something that shows we're still moving forward, that we're still innovating. We can't afford to appear weak right now. If we do, we risk losing everything we've worked for." Elon leaned back in his chair, considering the options. The court ruling may have been a setback, but he knew better than anyone that public perception could change on a dime. He'd seen it happen with Tesla when they were on the brink of bankruptcy, and with SpaceX when no one believed they could succeed. The key was to keep moving forward, to show the world that he wasn't backing down. "We'll announce the next big project," he said decisively. "We need to shift the narrative. Something that proves we're still leading the way. Something audacious, something that grabs attention." The room fell silent as everyone processed the idea. It was bold, but that was the point. Elon had always thrived on boldness. And in this moment, it was his only option. The next big thing had to be something that reminded everyone of why they had believed in him in the first place. "I'm thinking of SpaceX," Elon continued, his eyes lighting up as the idea began to take shape. We've been talking about Mars for years. Maybe it's time to make an official announcement about the timeline for our first human mission. Let's put a stake in the ground and show the world we're serious about colonizing Mars. We need to show them we're still innovating, still changing the world. Gwyn raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Given the current climate. Yes, Elon interrupted. This is exactly the time to double down. We can't let this legal battle define us. We'll make the announcement next week, get it out there, loud and clear. Mars is still the goal. If we pull this off, it'll be a game changer. The advisors exchanged looks, some uncertain, but ultimately, they knew better than to argue. Elon was right. He had always been right when it came to pushing the envelope. And when he said something was going to change the world, it usually did. The decision was made, and the next few days were filled with frenetic energy. The marketing teams at both SpaceX and Tesla worked tirelessly on creating the perfect launch strategy. Social media campaigns were crafted, press releases were drafted, and Elon personally oversaw every detail. He knew that in order to regain control of the narrative, he needed to make sure the announcement was as bold and powerful as possible. But even as the plan began to take shape, the weight of the rising conflict still hung over him. The legal battle was far from over, and the media would continue to scrutinize every move he made. The stakes were higher than ever. If the announcement didn't land, if the public wasn't convinced that he still had the vision and the drive to lead these companies forward, it could all come crashing down. Yet, as Elon stared at the plans for the Mars mission, he felt something that had been missing for a while: hope. There was a path forward, a way to turn the tide. And even though the battle was far from won, he knew that his journey was far from over. The road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't about to back down. And neither was the world. The announcement hit the press like a tidal wave. Elon Musk had just unveiled the most audacious plan in the history of space exploration. SpaceX would launch its first human mission to Mars within the next 5 years. The press release, drafted with meticulous care, was filled with bold language, big numbers, and the kind of vision that Elon was known for. It described the mission not just as a scientific endeavor, but as a step toward humanity's future, toward making life multiplanetary. The media ate it up. Social media exploded with reactions. Some were skeptical, questioning the feasibility of such a massive project, especially considering the legal drama surrounding Elon. But most were captivated. The world was watching. And for the first time in weeks, Elon felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. The announcement was just the beginning, though. Over the next few weeks, Elon and his team worked tirelessly to refine the details of the mission. SpaceX engineers began the process of designing the spacecraft, which would need to be capable of supporting human life on a 2-year journey to Mars. Elon was relentless in his pursuit of perfection. He knew that the success of the Mars mission would not only define his legacy but would also silence his critics and bring his companies back into the public's good graces. But as exciting as the Mars mission was, it wasn't the only battle Elon was facing. The court case was still looming. The judge's words had been harsh, and the lawsuit had escalated beyond his control. It was no longer just a matter of SpaceX and Tesla. The outcome of this case could affect everything, from investor confidence to government contracts, to the very future of the companies that Elon had poured his soul into. Despite the mounting pressure, Elon threw himself into the Mars mission. He was used to juggling multiple crises at once. It was part of the job description when you were trying to change the world. But this time, the stakes felt higher than ever before. His legal team was working around the clock to mitigate the fallout, but it wasn't easy. The media wouldn't let up. Every detail of the trial was front-page news. Every word Elon spoke in public was dissected and scrutinized. One night, as Elon sat in his office at SpaceX, reviewing design schematics for the Mars spacecraft, his phone buzzed. He looked down to see a message from his chief lawyer, David, a man who had been with him for years. Urgent. The judge is set to issue a ruling on the lawsuit tomorrow. We need to talk. Elon felt a tightening in his chest. The last thing he wanted was another setback. The Mars mission was his beacon of hope, his lifeline to the future, but the legal case had the potential to bring everything crashing down. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the night sky, the lights of Los Angeles twinkling below. He had spent his life looking toward the stars. But now, it seemed that the very ground beneath him was shifting. He couldn't lose. Not after everything he'd built. Not after coming so far. Minutes later, David arrived at SpaceX headquarters. Elon met him in his office, his face tight with concern. "We're still waiting on the ruling," David began, settling into the chair across from Elon. "But we've just received word that the judge is preparing to issue a ruling that could force us to make significant changes to the way Tesla and SpaceX operate. The judge has expressed concerns about corporate governance and management style." Elon frowned. "What does that mean for us?" "It means that if the ruling goes against you, there could be consequences ranging from fines to severe restrictions on your ability to lead both companies. We might have to restructure or even relinquish some control to outside parties." Elon's heart sank. He had always been fiercely protective of his companies, and the thought of losing control, of being forced to step back from the day-to-day operations, felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. He had always believed that the best way to lead was from the front, making decisions, inspiring innovation, and driving the companies toward the future. "We can fight it," David continued, sensing Elon's frustration. "But this could drag on for months, and in the meantime, we need to maintain investor confidence. That means we need to make sure the Mars mission is a success. If we can pull that off, we'll have a stronger position in the court of public opinion." Elon took a deep breath. The weight of the situation was almost too much to bear. He had to think fast. The Mars mission was more than just a project, it was the key to his redemption, the one thing that could lift him and his companies above the chaos that was threatening to swallow them whole. "I'm not backing down," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We're going to show them that SpaceX and Tesla are stronger than ever. We'll keep pushing forward with the Mars mission, and we'll prove to the world that we're unstoppable." David nodded, understanding the fire in Elon's eyes. "That's the spirit. But we'll need all hands on deck. The next few weeks will be critical. We have to stay focused." Elon spent the next few days immersed in the Mars project. He visited SpaceX's engineering labs, pushing his team to refine their designs. He participated in countless meetings, each one more intense than the last, as they worked to address every possible challenge that could arise during the mission. The pressure was unrelenting, but it was also invigorating. It reminded him of why he started this journey in the first place, to create something that would outlast him, to push humanity forward. Despite the whirlwind of activity, the legal case hung over him like a dark cloud. Every decision he made, every step he took with SpaceX and Tesla, seemed to be under a microscope. He could feel the walls closing in as the ruling drew nearer. Would the judge rule in his favor? Or would his empire crumble? The answer, it seemed, would come soon. The day of the ruling arrived, and Elon knew it was time. The court case would reach its conclusion, and he would either rise or fall. There was no in-between. In the hours leading up to the verdict, Elon paced back and forth in his office, his mind racing. The team was on edge, but they all knew that whatever happened, they had to stay the course. SpaceX's mission to Mars was their future. It was the future of humanity. As the clock ticked toward the hour of the ruling, Elon took a deep breath and looked out the window once more. He was about to face his greatest challenge yet. And no matter the outcome, he was ready to take that next step. The ruling came down in the late afternoon, the air heavy with anticipation. The legal team had warned him that the judge could go either way, but Elon wasn't ready for the verdict that awaited him. He sat in his office, staring at the phone in his hand, waiting for the call that would change everything. The legal battle, which had been dragging on for months, was finally about to reach its end. He had expected some degree of uncertainty, but the reality of the situation hit him harder than he anticipated. Elon's mind was racing, but there was a clarity that cut through the chaos. The ruling would be critical to his future, to the future of SpaceX, Tesla, and all his companies. The stakes were higher than ever. His next move would be the defining one, no matter what the ruling said. His phone rang. Elon looked down and saw David's name flashing across the screen. "David," he answered, trying to steady his breath, though his voice still carried a tightness. "It's not good, Elon," David said, the words heavy with disappointment. "The judge has ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. There will be significant restrictions placed on you personally and on your role at Tesla and SpaceX." Elon's chest tightened, and for a moment, he was speechless. The verdict had come down with devastating consequences. He had known that there was a risk, but hearing it confirmed, in black and white, was like a punch to the gut. "Restrictions?" Elon finally managed to ask. "Yes. The ruling includes a ban on you personally holding certain positions at the companies for a period of time. They're concerned about your leadership style, and it's clear they want to see more oversight in the operations of both Tesla and SpaceX. They also imposed hefty fines." The room seemed to close in around him. Elon tried to maintain his composure, but the weight of the news was suffocating. His empire, his vision, was being stripped from him. For the first time in his life, he questioned everything. Was it worth it? All the late nights, the sacrifices, the relentless pursuit of an impossible dream. Was it all leading to this? "We're going to fight it," David continued. "We can appeal. We'll have a chance to show the courts that the future of both companies depends on your leadership. But right now, we need to take action. Fast." Elon didn't respond immediately. His mind was spinning, replaying the months of the trial and his battles in the media. He had never been afraid of challenges, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about proving something to the world, it was about his ability to stay at the helm of the companies he had built from the ground up. And now, the future of SpaceX and Tesla was uncertain. His role, his position, the very thing that defined him, was now in jeopardy. He looked out the window again, as if searching for some sign of clarity, something that would help him make sense of the chaos swirling around him. But the answer didn't come. Instead, the silence was broken by the sound of his phone buzzing again. It was a text from Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX. "Elon, we need to talk. We need to think about the next steps, and we need to keep pushing forward. The Mars mission is still in play. This is just a bump in the road." Gwynne had always been his anchor in moments like this. While others worried about appearances, Gwynne focused on results. She was right, the Mars mission was the key. It had to be. No matter what happened in the courtrooms, SpaceX's mission was too important to lose sight of. The world was depending on them, and now, more than ever, Elon needed to deliver. But could he? Could he push through this crushing defeat and still lead his companies to greatness? The emotional turmoil surged inside him, but Elon knew he couldn't afford to let it show. He had always been the one to stay calm, to move forward no matter what. And now, with everything at risk, he had no choice but to dig deep and keep fighting. He stood up, pacing the room again, the weight of the ruling still pressing on him. But then, a thought hit him. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every person who had believed in his vision. For every engineer, every designer, every worker at Tesla and SpaceX who had put in countless hours, believing in the dream of changing the world. He wasn't alone. He couldn't be. He texted Gwynne back, "Let's meet. It's time to move forward. The Mars mission is still happening." Minutes later, Elon walked into the meeting room where Gwynne and a few other key SpaceX executives were waiting. The tension in the room was palpable, but Elon could feel something rising inside him, a sense of purpose. This was a moment to show his team, and the world, that the trial may have been a setback, but it wasn't going to stop them. Gwyn spoke first. Elon, we've been watching the news. We know what happened. But we also know what we're capable of. SpaceX has always been about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and now, more than ever, we need to show the world that we can overcome anything. Elon nodded, his gaze steady. I've spent my life trying to prove that we can do the impossible. And today, we're going to prove it again. This ruling doesn't change our mission. If anything, it strengthens it. We are going to Mars, and no judge, no court, is going to stop us. The words came out with a confidence that surprised even him. But they were true. This wasn't the end of the road. It was just another challenge to overcome. We've already laid the groundwork, Elon continued. We've got the technology, the expertise, and the drive. The world's attention is on us, and we can't waste this moment. This is bigger than the trial, bigger than any legal ruling. This is about humanity's future. And I'm not backing down. Gwyn and the others exchanged looks, then nodded in unison. We're with you, Gwyn said, her voice unwavering. Let's make it happen. Elon smiled, the burden on his chest lifting just a little. There was still much to do, and the road ahead was going to be difficult. But in that moment, he knew something deep inside, he wasn't going to lose. The Mars mission would happen. SpaceX would thrive. And he would lead them there, no matter what. As the meeting ended, Elon stepped outside, looking up at the sky, his thoughts focused on the future. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he had made it this far by refusing to give up. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. But that only made the challenge worth it. The journey to Mars wasn't just a journey to another planet, it was the journey to proving that anything was possible, no matter the odds. And nothing, not even this ruling, could stop him from reaching for the stars. The days following the ruling felt like a blur to Elon. The legal battle wasn't over, but the initial shock had passed, and now, the hard work began. There was no time to dwell on setbacks or play the victim. If anything, the ruling had served as a reminder of just how fragile everything was. One misstep could unravel it all. Elon threw himself back into the Mars mission with renewed determination. It became the focal point of his life, his North Star. The entire world was watching, and he couldn't afford to falter now. SpaceX and Tesla were his life's work, and every obstacle he faced only sharpened his resolve to continue pushing the boundaries of innovation. But the ruling was a heavy weight on his shoulders. The legal team had already filed an appeal, and while that process was ongoing, there was still the constant pressure of not knowing how things would unfold. Would he truly be removed from key positions at his companies? Would the restrictions prove to be so debilitating that they stifled his ability to lead? Those were the questions that lingered in the back of his mind, even as he worked tirelessly on his grand vision. Gwyn Shotwell and the SpaceX leadership team were instrumental in keeping the ship steady during these tumultuous times. They had already begun to pivot, focusing not just on Mars, but on other key projects as well, from launching more satellites to expanding the Starlink network. SpaceX's mission, as Elon had always said, wasn't just about Mars. It was about enabling humanity's future, and there was plenty of work to do in the here and now. Even with all the pressure, Elon couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. The personal sacrifices, the years of sleepless nights, the failures, the victories, all of it had led him to this moment. He had always believed in doing the impossible, but now he was facing a reality where the impossible felt a lot more like a burden. One evening, Elon took a break from his endless meetings and walked out onto the balcony of his office at SpaceX. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. It was a moment of rare peace, and Elon knew it was time for reflection. He thought about his childhood, how he had always been fascinated by the stars, by the idea of a future beyond Earth. He thought about his early days at Tesla, how no one had believed in his vision but him. He thought about the people who had walked away from him, the relationships that had crumbled under the weight of his ambition. And he thought about his family, the people who had stood by him when the world didn't. His phone buzzed, breaking him from his thoughts. It was a message from his mother, May Musk. "Elon, I've been thinking a lot about everything lately. You're doing amazing things, and I'm so proud of you. But remember, it's not just about what you build, it's about the people you build it with. Don't lose sight of that." Elon smiled softly. His mother always had a way of cutting through the noise and reminding him of the bigger picture. In his relentless pursuit of his goals, he had sometimes forgotten what really mattered: relationships. People. His family, his friends, his team. There was something to what she said. Elon's companies had grown into giants, but at what cost? The sacrifices he had made for his ambitions had come at a personal price, and it wasn't one he could ignore anymore. The legal battle, the constant pressure, the near-constant isolation, it was all starting to take a toll. He looked out at the horizon, his thoughts swirling. The Mars mission was still on track, but now, more than ever, he realized that achieving the impossible wasn't just about building rockets. It was about building connections. It was about making sure that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, he never lost sight of the people who had helped him get this far. "Maybe it's time to focus on what really matters," Elon whispered to himself, the words heavy with meaning. The next morning, as he walked into SpaceX headquarters, Elon felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in weeks. There was still so much to do, so many challenges ahead. But the burden of uncertainty had been lifted. The appeal would take time, but he could focus on the bigger picture now, on SpaceX, on Tesla, on the Mars mission, and most importantly, on the people who made those dreams possible. Gwyn met him in his office, a slight grin on her face. "Ready to get back to work?" Elon smiled, more at peace than he had been in a long time. "Absolutely." The next few months were a blur of intense work. SpaceX's Mars mission was moving forward at full throttle. Engineers were fine-tuning the spacecraft, while the media buzzed with anticipation. The world was waiting, and Elon was determined to deliver. There was no room for distractions. But even amidst the frenzy of space exploration, Elon took the time to reconnect with his team. He met with Tesla engineers, sat down with key figures at SpaceX, and took long walks with Gwyn to discuss the future. He made sure to remind everyone of the larger vision, the vision of a future where humanity wasn't just stuck on Earth but was reaching for the stars. And slowly, the toll the ruling had taken on him began to fade. The more he focused on the work, on the people who were there with him every step of the way, the less the legal battle seemed to matter. The world had a tendency to get lost in the noise, but Elon had learned to block it out. In the end, the appeal was successful. The ruling was overturned, and Elon regained control of SpaceX and Tesla. But the victory felt different this time. It wasn't about the court decision, it was about the journey. The journey of pushing through the toughest times, of remembering that in the face of adversity, the work and the people were what truly mattered. As Elon sat in the command center at SpaceX, watching the final preparations for the Mars mission unfold, he knew that this was just the beginning. They had a long way to go, but he had learned an important lesson: success wasn't just about reaching the stars. It was about making sure you didn't lose yourself in the process. "Ready to make history?" Gwyn asked, standing next to him. Elon nodded. "Let's go." The rocket engines roared to life, and in that moment, as SpaceX prepared to launch humanity into the stars, Elon Musk knew that the impossible was within reach. But more importantly, he had finally found the balance between the stars and the people who made it all possible. And that was a future worth fighting for. Elon stood on the launch pad, the final countdown ticking away in the distance. The wind stirred around him, but it barely registered. His mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. The Mars mission wasn't just another launch, it was the launch. This would mark the beginning of humanity's journey to the Red Planet, and with every minute that passed, the weight of the moment became heavier. But despite the magnitude of what was about to happen, Elon felt a calmness he hadn't experienced in years. The legal battles, the media firestorms, the corporate challenges, those things had faded into the background. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered: this mission, this moment. SpaceX had spent years preparing for this, and today, all the blood, sweat, and tears would culminate in a breathtaking display of human ingenuity. The rocket, sleek and imposing, stood tall against the blue sky. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for and everything they were about to achieve. Gwyn stood beside him, her eyes scanning the countdown clock. "We've come a long way, Elon. You know that, right?" Elon nodded, his gaze fixed on the rocket. "I do. But we've got even further to go." He smiled softly, but there was no joy in it. Not yet. There was still too much riding on this moment. The rockets on the launch pad flared to life, the ground rumbling beneath them. The heat from the engines was almost unbearable, but to Elon, it was invigorating. It reminded him of all the years spent in the trenches, facing down impossible odds. SpaceX had defied expectations, proven the world wrong time and time again. And now, they were on the cusp of making history. The rocket began its ascent, cutting through the sky with a force that left the crowd watching in awe. Elon watched as the flames disappeared into the clouds. The ship was rising, breaking through the atmosphere, and for the first time, the thought of failure didn't even cross his mind. This was it. This was their time. But then, as the rocket reached its final stages of ascent, something unexpected happened. The rocket shuddered. For a split second, Elon's heart skipped a beat. He knew that space travel was never without risks, but he'd hoped they had ironed out every issue. There was a brief moment of uncertainty, an eerie silence that enveloped him. The voices of the engineers on the other end of his headset became louder as the rocket continued its climb, but his focus shifted completely to the screen in front of him. There it was, a red warning light flashing. "Abort! Abort!" shouted one of the engineers over the comms. Elon's heart began to race. His first instinct was to stay calm, but even the most seasoned leaders had their limits when it came to uncertainty like this. "Gwyn." Elon's voice was sharp, and he turned toward her as the rocket was still climbing. He could hear the urgency in the engineers' voices as they scrambled to assess what had gone wrong. "Elon," she said, her voice steady. "You've built this. We trust you. But remember, this isn't just about one launch. It's about the future." The words struck him, but the clock was ticking. There was no time to second guess. The mission couldn't afford a failure, not now. Not when they were so close. And yet, as he stood there, watching the screens, the undeniable truth settled in: SpaceX had done the impossible already. They had revolutionized space travel. They had made history. "Do we abort?" Gwyn asked, her eyes locked on him, unwavering. Elon didn't answer immediately. He glanced back at the rocket, the team, and the millions of people watching this moment in real time. The pressure was suffocating, but amidst it, he had the rare clarity that had guided him through his life's greatest obstacles. "We don't stop," Elon said firmly. "We fix it. We learn from it. We push forward." The engineers quickly communicated their findings. There had been a malfunction in one of the secondary boosters. It was a small issue, but serious enough to warrant concern. The rocket was still ascending, but they had to make immediate adjustments to ensure safety. "Time is critical," Elon said, speaking to the control room. "Redirect the course and start implementing emergency protocols. We'll go to secondary systems. We fix this." The room was silent for a beat, the gravity of his words sinking in. Then, the hum of activity began again. Engineers worked furiously, adjusting systems in real time, updating data, and recalibrating flight paths. The team worked in synchrony, their years of training kicking in to keep things under control. Elon stood in the center of the room, as calm and as composed as ever. He trusted his team. He trusted their vision. They had made it this far. And the rocket continued its path. Despite the technical glitch, the moment wasn't lost. The rocket had broken through the stratosphere, and it was now in space. They had done it. The first crewed flight to Mars had officially begun. Hours later, Elon stood in his office, staring at the data on the screens in front of him. The team had handled the malfunction with precision, and while the mission had been temporarily delayed, they had a chance to analyze what had gone wrong without jeopardizing the entire operation. "Any word from the crew?" Elon asked Gwyn, his voice quiet but still sharp with focus. "Everything's good. They're still on course," she replied, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screens. Elon exhaled slowly. It wasn't the perfect launch. There were still adjustments to be made, but they had gotten the job done. It wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about showing the world that setbacks could be overcome, that human ingenuity could always find a way. He turned back to the window, the cool evening air brushing against his face. Space had always been his great obsession, the thing that had driven him since childhood. The thought of sending humans to another planet, of pushing humanity's boundaries beyond Earth, this was the culmination of everything he had worked for. But in the midst of this achievement, he understood something more important than ever before. Success was never just about the destination. It was about the journey, the people who took it with you, the lessons learned along the way, and the willingness to face every challenge head-on. As the launch pad faded in the distance and the crew made their way towards Mars, Elon Musk knew that the hardest part of their journey was just beginning. And that, in itself, was the most exciting part of all. As the weeks passed, the world watched in awe as SpaceX's Mars mission advanced. The crew aboard the spacecraft were sending back regular reports, their excitement palpable. They had made it beyond Earth's atmosphere and were now on their way to the Red Planet, a dream years in the making. Elon kept a close eye on everything. The media buzzed with excitement, and for once, he could breathe a little easier. After all, the journey was underway, and everything was on track. But, as always with Elon, success was never something he could settle into for long. He was always thinking ahead, looking at what came next. While the Mars mission had taken center stage, there were other pressing issues that had to be addressed. The legal battles weren't over, and neither was the work that Tesla and SpaceX still had to do. Elon couldn't afford to get comfortable. Not when there was so much on the line. One evening, as Elon sat at his desk at Tesla's headquarters, his phone rang. It was a call he had been dreading, but he couldn't ignore it. "Elon, we need to talk," Gwyn's voice crackled through the phone. "It's about the Mars mission." Immediately, a knot formed in Elon's stomach. They'd had their share of technical difficulties, but nothing that had seemed too severe. He had hoped everything was smooth sailing from here on out. But that voice, the tone of it, told him otherwise. "What's going on?" Elon's voice was steady, but the tension was creeping in. "There's been a communications failure," Gwyn said, her voice low. "We're not getting a signal from the spacecraft." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "How long?" "Hours," she replied. "We've been trying to re-establish contact, but there's no response. It's not normal." Elon's mind began to race. A communications failure? In the middle of the mission? This wasn't just a technical glitch, it could be much worse. "Have you reached out to the crew?" Elon asked, though he already knew the answer. "We've tried everything," Gwyn said. "We've alerted NASA and the other space agencies, but as of now, there's no word." Elon stood up from his desk and paced across the room. This wasn't just a glitch. This wasn't just a problem to be solved in a few hours. There was something deeper at play, something that could derail the entire mission. He knew he had to keep his cool. His team was counting on him. The world was counting on him. But right now, the only thing that mattered was getting the crew back in communication. Whatever it took, he had to fix it. "We'll figure this out," Elon said, his voice firm despite the storm raging inside him. "Keep trying. Don't stop until you've exhausted every possibility." The rest of the night was spent in a whirlwind of activity. Engineers scrambled, working around the clock to pinpoint the problem. NASA's experts were brought in for their insight, and SpaceX's communication team dug through every layer of potential issues. For hours, there was nothing, no sign, no response. Elon stayed glued to his phone, his eyes constantly flicking between the screens in his office. His mind was constantly at work, coming up with new scenarios, new solutions. He had been through rough patches before, but this was different. This was the Mars mission. This wasn't just another project, it was the project. By early morning, just as exhaustion was starting to set in, a message came through on Elon's phone. "We've got a signal," the message read. It was brief, but it sent a rush of relief through his body. "Is it the crew?" Elon shot back. There was a pause. Then, "It's not the crew. It's something else." Elon's heart sank. It wasn't the crew. What could it be? The engineers had finally managed to trace the source of the signal, and what they discovered was beyond anything anyone had expected. The transmission was coming from a different location, one that didn't make sense. The signal was not from the Mars-bound spacecraft. It was coming from an uncharted part of space, somewhere that didn't match the trajectory of their mission at all. Elon felt his blood run cold. The data was clear, something had altered the spacecraft's course. Something had pushed it off path. And now, instead of heading toward Mars, the spacecraft was heading into unknown space. The realization hit him hard. "How is this possible?" he muttered to himself. He quickly called Gwyn. "This isn't a glitch, is it? Someone or something has intentionally tampered with the spacecraft's systems. This isn't just a technical failure." "I'm afraid so," Gwyn's voice was grim. "There's a chance that the crew's been compromised. We're checking everything, every line of code, every system. We need to know what happened, and we need to know fast." Elon's mind raced, piecing together the possibilities. Had there been a cyber attack? Could someone have hijacked the spacecraft remotely? But who would have the means, the motivation, and the knowledge to carry out such an operation? "Get me every expert we have," Elon said urgently. "We need to find out what happened before it's too late." As the hours stretched on, the team worked relentlessly, but the answers were slow to come. No one had anticipated this kind of interference, at least not at this scale. But as they delved deeper into the spacecraft's systems, they began to uncover something strange. There had been a subtle alteration to the course program, a series of small adjustments that had been made, almost imperceptible, long before the mission had even launched. "Someone planted this," one of the engineers finally said. "This wasn't a random malfunction. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." Elon's mind spun. The question loomed larger than ever: who could have done this? The answer, when it came, shocked everyone. It wasn't a competitor. It wasn't a rogue hacker. It was something far more terrifying. Someone on the inside. Gwyn's voice crackled over the line. "We're looking at sabotage. Someone within the company itself." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. They were no longer facing a technical failure or a natural disaster. They were dealing with a conspiracy. Someone within his own ranks had deliberately compromised the mission. He had no idea who. But he was determined to find out. The stakes had just been raised to a level he never could have imagined. And this wasn't just about getting to Mars anymore. This was about survival. Elon stood in front of the massive screen in the control room, his gaze fixed on the data streaming in from the spacecraft. Every piece of information, every signal, now carried the heavy weight of suspicion. SpaceX had prided itself on being a tight-knit family, and the idea that someone from within could betray them felt like a gut punch. His team, had always been the backbone of their success. This was supposed to be a moment of triumph, but now, it was tinged with uncertainty. Someone on the inside, he muttered under his breath. His mind was racing as the weight of the situation sunk in. Who could have done this? Gwyn walked into the room, her face grim. She didn't need to say anything, her expression said it all. We've reviewed all access logs. There are anomalies in the data. Someone used privileged access to alter the course. Elon turned to face her, the realization of how close they were to a nightmare sinking in. How could this happen? We've always had such strict security protocols. Gwyn nodded. We did, but this wasn't just a hacking attempt. It's much more subtle. Whoever did this was careful, strategic. They knew exactly how to manipulate the system without triggering alarms. Elon clenched his fists. We're talking about sabotage. And it could end with the crew's lives at risk. I need to know who did this, and I need to know now. The team worked quickly to trace the hackers' movements through the system, and as the hours passed, Elon could feel the pressure mounting. There were only so many leads to follow, and every time they thought they had something concrete, it led to a dead end. Whoever was behind this had covered their tracks well. Then, a breakthrough. One of the junior engineers, a young woman named Sarah, noticed an odd pattern in the data logs. An unexpected sequence of commands had been executed during the spacecraft's initial prep stages. The code didn't belong to any of the engineers currently working on the mission. It was old, dated, almost as if it had been planted long ago, waiting for the right moment to activate. Who would have access to this? Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gwyn's expression darkened. It's a senior engineer's credentials. Someone with deep knowledge of the system's architecture. Someone who could exploit a weakness. Elon felt the weight of the realization settle over him. This was no random act. It was someone who knew the company, knew its processes, inside and out. This wasn't just about the mission, it was personal. Whoever had done this had been watching for the right moment, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Find out who, Elon ordered. We need to know exactly who has been accessing this system, and where they've been. The team worked tirelessly through the night, poring over access logs, pulling up every trace they could find. As dawn approached, they had a name. It was Ethan Porter, one of SpaceX's lead engineers, a brilliant mind who had been with the company for years. Elon felt a cold wave of disbelief. Ethan had been with SpaceX since its early days. He had helped design some of the most critical systems for the company. He was more than just an employee, he was a trusted member of the family. Or so Elon had thought. Ethan? Are you sure? Elon asked, his voice tinged with shock. Yes, Gwyn said, her voice quiet. The access logs confirm it. Ethan's credentials were used to alter the trajectory of the spacecraft. And it wasn't just one command, it was a series of small, deliberate changes, spread out over the course of several weeks. Elon felt his world tilt on its axis. Ethan had been one of the first engineers to believe in their mission. He had been part of the team that helped bring SpaceX to where it was today. The thought of betrayal from someone so close felt like a gut-wrenching betrayal of everything Elon had built. We need to confront him, Elon said, his mind made up. Now. Gwyn nodded. We'll arrange a meeting. But Elon, we need to be careful. Ethan is too smart. He'll have his defenses ready. Elon didn't care. The truth had to come out, and if it meant going head-to-head with one of his own, so be it. Within hours, Elon and Gwyn were sitting in a conference room, waiting for Ethan to arrive. The tension was thick, the air charged with anticipation. Elon's mind kept circling back to the same question, why? Why sabotage the mission? What was his motivation? The door opened, and Ethan walked in, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a hint of nervousness. When his eyes met Elon's, there was no sign of guilt, no sign of shame. Instead, there was a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Elon." "Gwyn," Ethan said, his voice even. "What's this about?" "We know what you did, Ethan," Elon said, his voice firm. "We know you sabotaged the Mars mission. You altered the course of the spacecraft, and you did it intentionally." Ethan's face remained neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elon leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "We have the access logs. We know it was you. The question is why?" Ethan paused, looking down at his hands, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" he echoed. "Because I don't believe in what we're doing. I don't believe in your vision, Elon. I never did." Elon's heart dropped. "What are you talking about? You've built a company on promises, on dreams of reaching Mars, of saving humanity," Ethan said, his voice growing more animated. "But all I see is a man obsessed with his ego, pushing forward without any consideration for the risks, the consequences. You've put people in danger, people I've worked with, people I care about. And for what? To make history? To be remembered as the man who colonized Mars? It's reckless, Elon. It's madness." Elon's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay composed. "So you decided to sabotage everything? To put innocent lives at risk just because you disagree with me?" Ethan stood up, his expression hardening. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. But I couldn't stand by and watch you destroy everything for the sake of your pride. The mission wasn't about humanity. It was about your ego. And I couldn't be a part of it." Elon's mind raced. This was more than just sabotage, it was a personal vendetta. Ethan had been close to him, had believed in him once, but now, something had driven him to this extreme. "I was wrong to think that we could change the world with just technology," Elon said, his voice quieter now. "I should have listened. But sabotage, this? It's not the answer, Ethan." Ethan didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out, leaving Elon and Gwyn in stunned silence. As the door closed behind him, Elon realized that this was more than just a betrayal. This was a moment that would shape the future of SpaceX. They had to move forward, no matter the cost. And somehow, they would have to do it without Ethan Porter. The morning after confronting Ethan was a blur. Elon's mind was racing, every thought tangled with questions he couldn't immediately answer. Ethan had been one of his most trusted engineers, a key player in making SpaceX what it was today. Now, he was gone, exiled from the company, his betrayal exposed, but the damage had already been done. Elon had always known that not everyone would understand his vision, that not everyone would support the radical changes he was trying to make. But to be betrayed by someone he had once considered a friend and a collaborator was a bitter pill to swallow. And now, the Mars mission hung in the balance. It had been nearly a full day since the confrontation, and Elon hadn't been able to focus on anything other than the feeling of betrayal. His office was filled with calls, meetings, and ongoing investigations into the sabotage, but none of it felt important. His mind was still on the crew and the spacecraft. If Ethan had tampered with their mission, what other surprises could be waiting? "Elon, you need to take a step back," Gwyn said as she entered his office. "You're running yourself into the ground. We've got to focus on fixing this, and we can't do that if you're not taking care of yourself." Elon glanced up from the screen, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I can't stop, Gwyn. The crew is out there, and we've got a mission to finish. I can't let Ethan's sabotage be the end of it." She took a deep breath. "I understand, but we have to face facts. Ethan's actions have put us behind, and you've got a lot more to think about than just this mission right now." Elon rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. "What's the latest on the spacecraft?" Gwyn hesitated. We're still trying to regain full control over the trajectory. It's not easy. Ethan was good at what he did. His code is embedded in the system, and we're having to unravel layers of it, one by one. Elon's jaw clenched. He knew how difficult this was. Ethan had been part of the core team, a key player in the early days of the Mars mission. But the crew had to be safe. SpaceX had to prevail. The mission was bigger than one person, bigger than any setback. Keep me updated, Elon said firmly. I'm not leaving until we fix this. The world is watching. We can't afford to fail. Gwyn nodded, her face a mask of professionalism. We'll get there, Elon. We always do. Back in the control room, a palpable sense of urgency had taken over. Engineers were working in a feverish state, their eyes glued to screens as they tried to isolate the problem. Each new breakthrough, no matter how small, felt like a victory, but the real test was still ahead. They hadn't been able to re-establish full communication with the Mars-bound crew, and the fear of what might be happening aboard the spacecraft was growing. For hours, Elon and Gwyn paced back and forth, waiting for any sign of progress. Finally, the call came. Elon, we have them. We've re-established communication with the crew, one of the engineers shouted across the room. Elon felt his pulse quicken as the news sunk in. They had found a way to reconnect with the crew. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope appeared. We're patching through now, the engineer continued. It's going to take a few minutes, but they're going to be able to speak to you directly. Elon exhaled, trying to steady his breath. It had been too long, too much uncertainty. But now, they had a lifeline. Minutes later, the screen in front of Elon flickered to life, and the familiar face of Commander Lily Harris appeared. Her expression was a mix of relief and exhaustion. Elon, she said, her voice crackling through the static. It's good to see you again. Elon's heart clenched. Lily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We've been working non-stop to get things back on track. She gave a small nod. We know. We've been feeling it up here. But we're okay. We've been following protocol, and we're holding steady. The situation is under control. For now. Elon felt a wave of relief flood over him, but it was short-lived. But the course, he asked, his voice thick with concern. You're still on the right trajectory, right? Lily hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering to something off-camera. Not exactly. We're off course. A little. But we're working on it. It's not as bad as it seems. Elon's blood ran cold. How far off course are you? Enough to put us out of communication for a while, Lily admitted, her voice steady but tinged with concern. But we've been able to make some adjustments. It's going to take some time, but we're not in immediate danger. We're doing everything we can to stay on track. Elon could hear the strain in her voice, but it didn't escape him that she was trying to keep him calm. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. The lives of the crew were at stake, and they were all hanging by a thread. Just, stay safe, Elon said, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. We'll keep working on our end. We'll get you home, Lily. I promise. We trust you, Elon, she replied softly. We'll keep doing our part. Just take care of everything down there. With that, the connection was cut, and the room fell into a heavy silence. Elon's heart was still racing, his thoughts spinning. They had the crew back, but the mission was still at risk. They had to fix the course, and they had to do it fast. Ethan's sabotage had put them in a precarious position, and now, more than ever, the team needed to come together. Gwyn walked over and placed a hand on Elon's shoulder. We'll fix this, Elon. We'll make it right. We just need to keep moving forward. Elon nodded, though the weight of everything pressing on his shoulders felt heavier than ever. The mission wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a battle for survival. And as he looked around at the team working tirelessly in the control room, he realized one thing: they had made it this far, and they weren't going to give up now. It was time to fight back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days were a blur of chaos and determination. With the mission hanging in the balance, Elon and his team worked around the clock to rectify the damage Ethan had done. The sabotage had left deep scars on the spacecraft's trajectory, but each engineer and scientist at SpaceX had one singular goal: to get the Mars-bound crew back on track. Elon's mind, still reeling from the betrayal, was laser-focused on fixing the mission. The personal betrayal from Ethan, who had once been his most trusted ally, had begun to fade into the background of a larger, far more urgent challenge. The lives of the astronauts were at risk, and there was no time to dwell on personal emotions. The control room buzzed with activity. Engineers moved quickly from terminal to terminal, analyzing data, reworking code, and executing complex maneuvers to regain control over the spacecraft's flight path. SpaceX's success had always relied on its ability to innovate under pressure, but this time, there was no room for error. "Elon," Gwynn said, walking up to him with a look of quiet determination. "We've pinpointed the problem. It's a misalignment in the trajectory algorithms." Ethan had modified the system's core settings, subtly shifting the course. "It's fixable, but it'll take time." "How much time?" Elon asked, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got to correct the course manually. The crew can't do it from up there. We need to send a precise set of commands and adjustments. I estimate it'll take us about a week to get them back on the right path, if everything goes according to plan." Elon's eyes darted toward the mission dashboard. Every number, every figure felt like a countdown. One wrong move and it could cost everything. A week. He couldn't afford to lose a week. The stakes were too high. The mission wasn't just about getting to Mars anymore, it was about the survival of the people on board, the legacy of SpaceX, and everything he had worked for. "We're going to have to work faster," Elon muttered under his breath. Gwynn looked at him, her expression hardening. "I know. But rushing will only make things worse. We've got to be meticulous with every calculation." Elon knew she was right. He had built SpaceX on innovation, precision, and the ability to adapt under pressure. But this was different. Every step they took from here on out would determine whether the crew made it to Mars or became another casualty in the pursuit of the impossible dream. The decision was made. Elon ordered the team to split into specialized groups, some working on real-time communication, others on recalibrating the spacecraft's navigation system. Each group had to move in tandem, their work feeding into the next piece of the puzzle. There was no room for mistakes. The next few days felt like they were stretching into weeks. The team, driven by the urgency of the situation, moved with purpose, their eyes trained on the screens in front of them. The pressure in the control room was palpable. Everyone knew the weight of the task they had before them, but they also understood the magnitude of what they were fighting for. Elon spent nearly every waking hour in the control room, running through calculations, double-checking data, and working with his engineers to perfect every adjustment. Gwynn was by his side, handling logistics and keeping the team on track, her calm voice providing much-needed clarity in the midst of the storm. The crew in space, too, had their hands full. While they couldn't directly correct the course, they continued to monitor the spacecraft's systems, feeding information back to SpaceX to help guide the adjustments. Commander Lily Harris, though tired and frustrated, remained optimistic. The communication from SpaceX was their lifeline, and she trusted Elon and his team to get them through. As the hours turned into days, Elon felt like he was constantly walking a tightrope. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to the point of no return. He knew he couldn't afford to let his personal feelings cloud his judgment. Ethan's betrayal had been devastating, but the mission, the lives of the crew, were far more important. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, the day came when the first full set of recalibrations was ready to be sent. Elon, his fingers trembling slightly, watched as the command was executed, sending the adjustments to the spacecraft's onboard systems. A sense of quiet anticipation filled the room as everyone waited for a response. The seconds stretched into minutes, and then the screen flashed. Signal received. The course is stabilizing, one of the engineers called out. Elon let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They were on the right track again. But there was no time to celebrate, not yet. The crew was still on their journey, and there were more adjustments to be made. Every step forward was a step closer to Mars, but it was also a step closer to an unknown future. In the days that followed, progress came slowly but steadily. The spacecraft's course was now on the correct trajectory, but there were still countless hours of recalibration and fine-tuning ahead. Elon and the team continued to push forward, driven by the knowledge that every second counted. But as they worked, something else was weighing on Elon's mind. Ethan. The betrayal still stung, and the fact that someone he had trusted so completely had turned on him gnawed at his thoughts. It wasn't just about the sabotage anymore, it was about understanding why Ethan had done it. Elon knew there had to be more to the story. Ethan's motivations weren't simply about disagreeing with SpaceX's mission. There was something deeper, something more personal at play. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan had been hiding something he had never shared with him. As the days passed and the course continued to stabilize, Elon found himself more and more fixated on the idea of confronting Ethan. He couldn't let the matter rest. If there was more to this story, he needed to know what it was. But for now, there was still work to do. The crew was depending on them, and SpaceX's future was hanging by a thread. Elon stood in the control room, watching the adjustments come through on the screens, when Gwyn walked up to him, her face serious. "Elon," she said, "there's something you need to see." Elon turned to her, his heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" Gwyn handed him a tablet, and Elon's eyes scanned the screen quickly. It was a message. An encrypted message. The sender was Ethan. For a moment, Elon was frozen. What was Ethan trying to tell him now? Elon's heart raced as he stared at the encrypted message on the screen. His hands, still trembling from days of intense work, gripped the tablet tightly. The message had arrived unexpectedly, almost as though Ethan knew Elon would be waiting for something, anything, to explain why the betrayal had occurred. Gwyn, standing beside him, was silent, her brow furrowed in curiosity. She had seen Elon go through countless moments of tension, but this felt different. This was personal. "You think it's a trap?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon didn't respond immediately. His mind was whirling with possibilities. Could it be? Could Ethan have another surprise up his sleeve, another trick to sabotage everything they had worked for? Or was this something else, something more sinister? "Open it," Gwyn urged. With a deep breath, Elon clicked the button to decrypt the message. The words slowly began to form on the screen, and as they did, a sinking feeling began to settle in his chest. "Elon. If you're reading this, I've already made my decision. I want you to understand why I did what I did. This wasn't about SpaceX, or Mars. This was personal. It's always been personal." Elon's eyes widened as the words registered. Personal. The implications of that one word sent a shock through him. His pulse quickened. The message continued. "For years, I've been watching you build this empire, this dream. And at first, I believed in it. But something happened, Elon. Something changed. You lost sight of who you were, what this was all about. You became obsessed with the mission, obsessed with being the first to put humans on Mars. And in that obsession, you started sacrificing people. Your people. My friends. I couldn't stand to watch it anymore." Elon felt a coldness creeping into his chest. The word stung, but they weren't the words of a man who was simply trying to cause chaos. This was more than anger, it was hurt, deep-seated and raw. I tried to warn you. I tried to show you the dangers of what you were doing. But you refused to listen. And when you pushed me out, pushed me away, I realized something. I had to make you see the consequences of your actions. I had to show you what happens when you put the mission before everything else. There was a long pause before the final part of the message appeared. I don't expect you to forgive me, Elon. But maybe, just maybe, you'll understand. You've always been driven, but you've never stopped to look at the people who've been with you along the way. You've treated us like tools, and when we've outlived our usefulness, you discard us. That's why I did it. Because I wanted you to feel what it's like when everything you've worked for starts to slip through your fingers. The message ended abruptly, leaving Elon staring at the screen, his mind reeling. Is this some kind of joke? Gwyn asked, clearly skeptical. He's admitting to it. He's actually justifying what he did. Elon didn't respond immediately. He was still processing the depth of Ethan's words. You've treated us like tools, and when we've outlived our usefulness, you discard us. Those words echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, each one more painful than the last. He had never thought of his team that way. At least, he hadn't intended to. His obsession with Mars, with reaching the stars, had always been about the bigger picture. About humanity's future. But Ethan's words held a mirror up to his face, showing him the darker side of his drive, something he hadn't wanted to confront. He had become so focused on the mission that he had overlooked the very people who had helped him build it. A heavy silence hung in the room. Gwyn looked at him, unsure what to say. She had known Elon for years, seen him navigate countless crises, but this was different. This wasn't about technology or space, it was about something deeper, something more personal. I never saw it like that, Elon finally muttered, his voice low. I didn't realize how far I'd pushed everyone. Not just Ethan, but the whole team. My friends. Gwyn's expression softened. Elon, you've always been intense. And you've always pushed the boundaries, but you've also inspired people to believe in something bigger than themselves. This is just Ethan's way of trying to get back at you. To hurt you the way he thinks you hurt him. Elon looked at her, his eyes tired but filled with realization. Maybe. But there's truth in it. I've been so focused on Mars, on the mission. I lost sight of the people who helped me get here. The weight of those words hung in the air. Elon had always known that his single-minded obsession could alienate people, but this was different. Ethan hadn't just been a colleague, he had been someone Elon had trusted. And yet, in the pursuit of his grand vision, he had let his trust slip away. Do you think it's too late to fix this? Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gwyn didn't hesitate. It's never too late to make things right. But you need to be honest with yourself, and with everyone around you. It's not just about fixing the mission, it's about fixing the culture. The trust. Elon stood still, the weight of Gwyn's words settling over him. He had always believed in the importance of trust in the mission, but now he realized he needed to rebuild that trust in the people who had been with him from the start. He couldn't afford to lose any more of them. He looked back at the message on the screen. Ethan had gone too far, but the pain, the truth in his words, was undeniable. It wasn't just about the sabotage anymore. It was about redemption. All right, Elon said quietly, determined. We'll fix this. I'll fix this. But first, there was something he needed to do. He had to make amends, not just with the team, but with himself. The days following Elon's realization were full of intensity, not only because of the critical mission ahead, but also because of the deep personal reflection he now found himself immersed in. For the first time in years, Elon Musk didn't just feel like the head of SpaceX, he felt like a man confronting his own flaws. Ethan's message had peeled back layers he hadn't known existed, and it forced him to face the emotional cost of his relentless pursuit of space. The mission to Mars was still top priority, but now, Elon knew that what came next would define him, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a leader, a friend, and a man. He couldn't simply rush past this revelation. The sabotage was one thing, but Ethan's words had made it clear that Elon's leadership had left people behind. Too many people. That night, as he sat alone in his office, Elon wrote in his journal, a habit he had picked up years ago but had let fall to the wayside in recent months. The ink flowed freely as he reflected on everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fallout, the mission, the team, and what it all meant. I've been so focused on building something bigger than myself that I forgot to build the people around me. I can't do this alone. If I lose the trust of my team, then none of this matters. Elon closed the journal and stared at the wall. There were dozens of projects, initiatives, and strategies waiting for his attention. But now, he knew, it was time for something more fundamental. It was time to restore the culture of SpaceX, not just the rocket trajectory. The next morning, he gathered the core leadership team in one of the smaller conference rooms at SpaceX headquarters. Gwynn, his trusted partner, was already there, along with a few other key figures, engineers and managers who had been with him through the highs and lows. "All right," Elon began, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk about the future of SpaceX. Not just the Mars mission, but the culture that got us here in the first place." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that something had changed. The pressure of the sabotage was mounting, but now, they sensed that Elon had a new, deeper sense of urgency. "After everything that's happened, I realize that my obsession with the mission and the bigger picture, it has come at a cost. I've ignored the very people who've helped make this possible. I've been so focused on the destination, I didn't stop to appreciate the journey with the team around me. I need to change that." Gwynn, ever the steady hand, looked at him with a combination of concern and support. "You've always been driven, Elon. But it's true. If we're going to continue building something world-changing, we need to make sure everyone feels part of the journey, not just the end result." Elon nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "I want to fix this. Not just the mission, our culture. We need to rebuild trust, to be open and honest with one another. Ethan's sabotage is a wake-up call, but I'm responsible for that as much as anyone else. So, here's what I propose." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm going to personally reach out to every team member who's been with SpaceX for the long haul. I want to apologize, to listen to their concerns, and to understand what I could have done differently. We need to rebuild, not just as a company, but as a family. And I need your help." The room was quiet for a moment as his words sank in. This wasn't the Elon they were used to, the relentless, single-minded entrepreneur who was always looking forward, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. This was a different Elon. One who was ready to take responsibility, not just for his own actions, but for the collective success and failure of the entire team. "Elon," Gwynn said after a beat, her voice soft but resolute. "I think this is the right move. You've always known how to get us to aim higher, but now, it's about aiming together. Let's make sure we bring everyone back to the table. We can't do this without them." Elon smiled, albeit a tired one. "I agree. It's time to start rebuilding. But let's be clear, we're not just fixing SpaceX. We're fixing ourselves." Over the next few weeks, Elon followed through on his promise. He personally sat down with his engineers, his designers, and even his most junior team members. He listened to their feedback, their concerns, and their experiences, both positive and negative. There were tears, laughter, and moments of uncomfortable silence, but it was all part of the process. Through these conversations, Elon began to understand what he had failed to see before: the frustration, the fatigue, the feeling of being undervalued. He hadn't been aware of the emotional toll his drive for success had placed on the team. And yet, despite everything, the team had stayed. They had stayed because they believed in the mission, and they believed in him. But now, Elon had to show them that their belief in him wasn't misplaced. He didn't have all the answers, and he couldn't promise to always get it right. But he could promise one thing: he would always listen. And, more importantly, he would always have their backs. At the same time, work on the Mars mission continued. The trajectory had been corrected, and the spacecraft was slowly but surely making its way back on course. There was still so much to do: fine-tuning, recalibrating, checking every system, but for the first time in days, Elon felt a sense of optimism. The mission was still on track, and now, so was his relationship with his team. There was, however, one last thing that Elon had to address. Ethan. The message Ethan had sent lingered in his mind, and Elon knew that confronting him was inevitable. Ethan was no longer just a traitor, he was a part of Elon's past, and now, Elon needed to face him, not in anger, but with a desire to understand. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen for a moment before he typed out a message. "Ethan, we need to talk." It was a simple message, but the weight it carried was anything but. As Elon hit send, he knew that whatever happened next, whether it was an apology or a confrontation, it would change the trajectory of his life, just as surely as the mission had changed the course of human history. The journey, both in space and in life, was just beginning. The days that followed the message were a whirlwind. Elon had managed to reach out to nearly everyone at SpaceX, slowly mending fences and rekindling relationships that had been strained or ignored. His apologies were heartfelt, and, in many cases, his team members appreciated his openness. The air around SpaceX was changing, but there was one relationship that still loomed heavy over him: Ethan. Despite the efforts to rebuild, Elon couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. Ethan's betrayal had stung, but what hurt more was that Ethan's message had revealed a side of Elon that he hadn't wanted to see. He had taken his relentless pursuit of success to such extremes that he had left people like Ethan behind. And now, he needed to make things right. Elon's phone buzzed late one night as he sat alone in his office. The screen lit up with an incoming call, an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was Ethan finally reaching out? He answered the call, his voice steady but with a hint of nervous anticipation. Elon. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Ethan. Elon inhaled deeply before responding. Ethan. There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice cold but measured. I wasn't sure you'd actually follow through with this. I thought you'd just keep pretending everything was fine, like you always do. Elon leaned back in his chair, gripping the armrests. I don't want to pretend, Ethan. I can't. I'm here because I need to understand what happened. Why you did what you did. Ethan scoffed. You want to understand? I told you already. You've been so focused on Mars, on SpaceX, that you lost sight of everything else. You don't even realize the damage you've caused, do you? Elon's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. I realize now. But I didn't always see it that way. I've been obsessed with the mission, with the bigger picture. I lost sight of the people who helped me build it. I'm sorry for that. There was silence on the other end of the line. Elon's mind raced, wondering if Ethan would simply hang up, dismissing his apology as insincere. But after what felt like an eternity, Ethan spoke again. Do you think an apology is enough? Do you think I can just forget everything that's happened? Elon winced at the bitterness in Ethan's voice. I don't expect you to forget. I just want a chance to make it right. To fix what's broken. Ethan let out a dry laugh. You can't fix this, Elon. The damage is done. You pushed people away, you burned bridges. You don't even know how many people feel like I do, like you've discarded them the moment they weren't useful anymore. Elon's chest tightened as the words hit him hard. He had heard the complaints before, but hearing them from Ethan, the one person who had once been a close ally, cut deeper than anything else. "I never meant to hurt anyone," Elon said softly. "I was so focused on the bigger picture that I didn't see the toll it was taking. But I want to change that. I want to start over." Ethan was quiet for a moment before responding, his tone less hostile but still distant. "You can try. But I don't know if it'll ever be the same." "I don't expect it to be," Elon replied. "But I want to try. For the sake of the mission, and for the sake of the people who believe in us." Ethan sighed, the weight of his frustration palpable even through the phone. "I don't know, Elon. It's hard to just let go of everything that's happened. You can't just erase what you've done." "I'm not trying to erase it," Elon said, his voice firm. "I'm trying to learn from it. I'm trying to do better. And I need you to be a part of that." There was another long silence, but this time, it wasn't filled with anger or resentment. It was a pause, a moment where both men seemed to be considering their next move, trying to make sense of the complex web they had woven. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I don't know what comes next, Elon. But maybe we can start with a conversation. One that's real. Not about Mars, not about rockets. Just us." Elon's heart beat faster at the prospect of reconciliation. "I'd like that." "All right. But don't expect it to be easy. I can't promise anything." "I'm not asking you to," Elon said. "I'm just asking for a chance." The conversation ended, and Elon sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly as a weight seemed to lift from his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope, a sense that perhaps there was a path forward for him and Ethan, and maybe even for SpaceX. The next few days were a blur of activity. The Mars mission was still on course, but Elon found himself more focused on his personal journey, one that was just as important, if not more so. He continued to work with his team, ensuring that the mission's progress was unhindered, but he also made time to connect with them, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. He wasn't the same person who had rushed through every day with tunnel vision. Now, he was taking the time to listen, to truly listen. And as he sat at his desk late one evening, staring out at the stars above, Elon felt the weight of his responsibility. Not just to the mission, but to the people who believed in him, who had stood by him even when he didn't deserve it. As he looked up at the night sky, Elon knew one thing for certain: the road ahead would be long and difficult, but it was worth it. Because this time, it wasn't just about reaching the stars. It was about the people standing beside him, the ones who would help him get there. And that, he realized, was the greatest journey of all. Later that week, Elon met with Ethan. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with uncertainty and raw emotion, but it was a start. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just colleagues fighting for a cause, they were two men, trying to navigate the complexities of their past. As they parted ways, there was a sense of tentative hope in the air. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was a step toward understanding, and that was all Elon could ask for. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something even greater than the mission to Mars. The weeks that followed Elon's confrontation with Ethan felt like a different chapter of his life entirely. Each day, he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, though not for the Mars mission, at least not entirely. Elon's mind had shifted. He found himself working just as hard, but now with the intention of mending the relationships that had been broken during his unrelenting climb toward success. The reality of what had happened over the years, the way he had pushed people away without ever realizing it, weighed on him heavily. The people who had helped SpaceX rise from the ground up, the people who had believed in his vision when no one else did, he had abandoned them for the sake of progress. Elon began to have one-on-one conversations with more of his team, not just the top brass, but also the engineers, designers, and technicians who were the backbone of the company. They were willing to listen, just as he was willing to listen to them now. He apologized, he heard their grievances, and, most importantly, he made it clear that they were as vital to the mission as any rocket or spaceship. Every day brought a new challenge. But with each small conversation, Elon was rebuilding the trust he had lost, brick by brick. But one thing remained unsettled in his mind: what would happen when the Mars mission finally launched? Elon knew he couldn't keep balancing both the mission and his people forever. There was only so much of him to go around, and he had to find a way to harmonize these two parts of his life: the impossible goal of reaching Mars and the people who were right here on Earth, supporting him. In the weeks since the conversation with Ethan, the tension had slowly begun to thaw. While the relationship between the two of them wasn't fully healed, there had been a significant shift. They spoke more freely now, no longer with the walls of resentment, but with the understanding that healing was a slow process. Elon knew it wasn't enough to simply apologize. Ethan's anger had been justified, and the trust he had lost couldn't be restored with a few words. Still, there was progress. Elon could see it in Ethan's eyes when they spoke, a glimmer of the person he had once been. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One evening, after a long day of meetings and team discussions, Elon found himself walking through the SpaceX facility, lost in thought. He stopped at a window overlooking the assembly area where rockets were being worked on. His team was hard at work, engineers adjusting machinery, technicians calibrating systems, and designers sketching new ideas on tablets. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt truly connected to them. The weight of his obsession with the future, his singular drive to make history, had been lifted. He wasn't just leading SpaceX anymore, he was part of it. He was one of them. Just then, Gwyn called him over, her voice light yet serious. "Elon, we've got something to discuss. You might want to sit down for this." He followed her to a small office, curious. "What's going on?" "We're seeing the first signs of major success," Gwyn said, a smile creeping onto her face. "The Mars mission trajectory has been recalculated perfectly. The spacecraft is nearing a key milestone, and everything seems to be progressing ahead of schedule. Our tests are showing better results than we anticipated." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He had been so focused on repairing his personal relationships that he hadn't kept a close eye on the mission details. Now, hearing that things were going so well, a surge of energy flowed through him. "This is huge," he said, his mind already racing with the possibilities. "It is," Gwyn agreed. "But, there's one more thing." She hesitated, then continued, "We've received new intel about potential threats to the mission, sabotage, possibly from external sources. Our security team's investigating, but I wanted you to be aware. We've been getting reports of suspicious activity around the launch site." The mention of sabotage immediately brought Elon back to the conversation he had had with Ethan. Had the threats been part of something larger? Were there still people out there who wanted to bring down SpaceX? The very thought sent a chill through him. But he couldn't focus on that yet, he had work to do. "Keep me updated," Elon replied, his voice hardening. "Let's stay ahead of this." As the days passed, the investigation into potential sabotage continued. Security tightened around the SpaceX facilities, and the threat level increased. Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This was a reminder that the dangers outside the company were just as real as the challenges within it. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the mission, Elon remained focused on the things that mattered most. He kept working with the team, emphasizing that the mission was just as much about the people as it was about the technology. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. He was also faced with a difficult decision: what would happen when the Mars mission finally launched? Would his relationship with his team survive the immense pressure of the task at hand? Could he continue leading SpaceX while keeping the human element intact? One night, as Elon sat alone in his office, staring out at the darkened sky, a thought crossed his mind, something he hadn't fully considered before. The success of the Mars mission would be remarkable, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. The real test would be whether SpaceX could thrive as an organization after the mission, when the dust settled and the world moved on. And that success would depend not just on the technology, but on the team, the people who had stood by him, who had supported his vision, and who would help him reach new heights, both on Earth and in space. A few days later, the SpaceX team gathered in the main conference room for a meeting. Elon stood at the front, Gwyn beside him. The room was filled with engineers, designers, and top-level executives. They were all there for one reason, to discuss the final stages of the Mars mission. "I've been through a lot over the past few weeks," Elon began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've learned a lot about myself, about what it means to lead, and about the importance of all of you, the ones who make SpaceX what it is." He paused, looking around the room. "And I've realized something crucial: this mission isn't just about going to Mars. It's about all of us, working together, in pursuit of something bigger than ourselves. We're not just building rockets, we're building the future of humanity. But that future starts here. It starts with each of you. And I want to make sure that, no matter where we go together." There was a silence in the room, a collective moment of reflection. And then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't just a cheer for the mission, it was a cheer for Elon's transformation, for his commitment to his team, and for the future they were all building together. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt something he hadn't experienced in years: true, unshakable hope. Not for the mission, not for Mars, but for the people who would help him reach it. This was only the beginning. The future of SpaceX, and humanity's future in space, was looking brighter than ever. As SpaceX's Mars mission continued to make remarkable progress, Elon's world was a delicate balancing act. On one hand, there was the mission itself, his obsession with space exploration, the dream of Mars, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. On the other hand, there was the delicate web of relationships he had to mend within the company, with friends and colleagues he had once distanced himself from. Elon had learned something vital over the past few months: success was not just about reaching for the stars. It was about the people you brought along for the ride. He couldn't afford to lose the support of his team again, not after everything they'd gone through. Still, there was a sense of urgency building. The Mars mission was on the verge of a major breakthrough, and the pressure to succeed had never been greater. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, not just for him personally, but for humanity itself. It was a rainy morning when the tipping point came. Elon was sitting at his desk, working through some final details for the Mars mission's launch, when he received a message from Gwyn. "Elon, we need to talk. Urgent." He immediately dialed her number, the worry beginning to rise in his chest. "What's going on?" Elon asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've just received a report from security," Gwyn said. "It's not good. There's been a breach." Elon's stomach dropped. "A breach? How bad is it?" "It's serious. We've got evidence that someone on the inside has been feeding information to external sources. Our security protocols have been compromised." Elon's mind raced. He knew the risks. SpaceX had always operated at the cutting edge, and there were always threats lurking. But to hear that they had been infiltrated by someone within their own ranks, that was something he hadn't anticipated. "Who is it?" Elon demanded. "Do we know who's behind this?" "Not yet," Gwyn replied. "But we're working on it. I've ordered an immediate investigation, but I need you to be prepared for the worst. This could delay the Mars mission. If the wrong people get their hands on our plans." Elon closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "We can't afford any setbacks. Not now." "I know," Gwyn said, her voice grim. "But we need to act quickly. We can't let this go any further." As the conversation ended, Elon felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a technical challenge anymore, it was a full-blown crisis, and the stakes had never been higher. The Mars mission was at risk, and if they didn't identify the mole quickly, everything they had worked for could unravel. That evening, Elon called a meeting with the top security team at SpaceX. Gwyn, along with the head of security, the chief technology officer, and other key figures, gathered in the conference room. "This is more than just a breach," Elon began, his tone serious. "We've been compromised, and I need to know who's responsible. Every second counts." The head of security, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, spoke up. "We've already identified a few potential suspects within the company. There's been unusual activity on their accounts, files accessed that they shouldn't have had clearance for. But we haven't been able to trace it back to any one person yet." Elon leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to find out who's doing this, and fast. We can't afford to let this sabotage the mission. But we also need to make sure the rest of the team stays focused. We can't let panic spread." Gwyn nodded. "Agreed. But we also need to start thinking about our next steps if the breach does turn out to be something more serious. We need to be ready to pivot, no matter what." The meeting stretched late into the night as they discussed strategies for tracking down the mole. Elon's mind was racing, but he knew that this was just another challenge, one more obstacle standing between him and the future he was determined to create. As the team began to file out of the room, Elon remained seated, staring at the screen in front of him. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, but instead of typing out the next mission plan, he found himself thinking about the people around him, the team he had almost lost. He had come so close to losing everything that truly mattered to him. And now, it was clear that the road ahead would be far from easy. But Elon Musk had never backed down from a challenge, and this was no different. He was determined to protect what he had worked for, no matter the cost. The following weeks were a blur of activity. The investigation into the breach was intense, and while the team worked tirelessly to pinpoint the mole, the pressure on Elon and SpaceX continued to mount. Tensions ran high, and the pressure to launch the Mars mission on schedule weighed heavily on everyone. Elon spent hours each day meeting with security, analyzing data, and ensuring the mission was still on track. But he couldn't help but feel the strain. His mind was pulled in multiple directions, his responsibility to the people who had once supported him, his commitment to the mission, and now, the threat from within the company. He didn't have the luxury of taking a step back. Not now. Finally, the breakthrough came. After days of painstaking investigation, they had a name. The mole was someone close to the mission, someone Elon had trusted. It was a shock to everyone, and to Elon, it felt like a punch to the gut. One of his own people, someone he had believed in, had betrayed them all for reasons that were still unclear. The sense of betrayal was deep, but Elon knew they couldn't afford to let emotions get in the way. The team acted quickly to neutralize the threat. The mole was apprehended, and the flow of information to outside sources was stopped. The damage had been contained, just barely. But it wasn't over yet. The investigation into the motives of the mole was just beginning. And as Elon looked at the mission schedule and the team's exhausted faces, he knew that this was just one battle in a war of much greater magnitude. The Mars mission was still on, but the road ahead was even more treacherous than before. That night, as Elon sat alone in his office, he realized something. The breach had reminded him of something fundamental: no mission, no matter how important, was worth sacrificing the people who made it possible. His relationship with his team had come a long way since he started on this journey, but it still needed work. The road ahead, both to Mars and to mending the wounds of the past, would not be easy. But in that moment, with the weight of the mission pressing down on him, Elon felt a spark of something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. He had come a long way, and despite the challenges, he was beginning to believe that SpaceX could achieve its greatest triumph, together. And that belief was the key to everything. In the days following the mole's exposure, the atmosphere at SpaceX was both tense and cautiously optimistic. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Elon knew that the damage done by the breach was only the beginning of a much bigger story. Trust, once broken, couldn't be easily restored. The entire organization had been rattled, and despite their swift action, there was a lingering sense of unease in the air. For Elon, the pressure was mounting from every direction. The Mars mission was on track, but only just. The sabotage attempt had disrupted the flow of work, causing delays in critical phases of the mission. He had to push forward, but he also had to rebuild a sense of unity and security within the team. They had been through so much already, and Elon knew that they needed something more than just technical guidance. They needed to feel supported and heard. One evening, as the sun began to set over the SpaceX campus, Elon stood by the window in his office, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His mind wandered to the enormity of what lay ahead. Mars was still the dream. It always had been. But now, with everything that had transpired, he felt a deeper responsibility, not just to the mission, but to the people who had made it possible. He had learned a lot over the past few months. The singular pursuit of greatness, without regard for the people who stood by him, had been a mistake. Success had its price, and he had paid it in full. The rift between himself and many of his closest allies was not something that could be fixed overnight. But it was something he had to address, for the sake of both the mission and his own peace of mind. The following morning, Elon called for an all-hands meeting, a rare move for someone who had always preferred to communicate with his senior team. The decision to address the entire company wasn't made lightly, but he knew that after everything that had happened, it was time to address his team directly. The conference room was packed. Every employee from engineers to support staff to security personnel had gathered. Some were hopeful, some were uncertain, but all were eager to hear what Elon had to say. Standing at the front of the room, Elon took a deep breath before he began. "I'm not here to talk about rockets or Mars today," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to talk about something even more important, the people who make SpaceX what it is. Without you, none of this would be possible." There was a quiet murmur in the room. Elon paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the people he had come to rely on more than he ever thought he would. "I've made mistakes," he continued, the words heavy with meaning. "I've lost sight of what truly matters at times, in the pursuit of something bigger. But I've learned. I want to rebuild the trust that's been broken. I want to make sure that every one of you feels valued, not just as part of a mission, but as part of a team." There was a long silence. Elon felt the weight of the room's attention pressing on him, but he pushed through it. "We've had setbacks. We've had betrayals. But we can't let that define us. We have a goal, one that could change humanity forever. And it's not just about getting to Mars. It's about what we're doing together, as a unit. I promise you, from this moment on, I will prioritize all of you. You deserve that." His words hung in the air for a moment, before a slow ripple of applause started. It wasn't the loudest cheer, but it was a sincere one. Elon didn't expect instant forgiveness, but the shift was palpable. He could feel the tension start to melt away, replaced by a sense of solidarity. That evening, as Elon walked through the now quieter SpaceX halls, a thought lingered in his mind. Could he truly lead in a way that balanced both the mission and the people? The Mars mission was, after all, only part of the equation. The way he treated his team, the way they worked together, would ultimately determine SpaceX's long-term success. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, and he found himself pausing in front of the room where they were assembling the next generation of rockets. The project was advancing, albeit slower than anticipated, but it was still going. And in that moment, Elon felt the undeniable weight of what was at stake. Not just the mission, but the future of the company, the team, and maybe even humanity itself. Days turned into weeks, and the progress on the mission began to pick up pace again. The sabotage seemed like a distant memory, though the aftershocks were still being felt. Every decision was scrutinized more carefully now, and Elon found himself walking a fine line between pushing his team to new heights and ensuring that they didn't feel the same level of burnout that had characterized the early years of SpaceX's development. One afternoon, as Elon sat in a meeting discussing the final stages of the Mars mission, his phone buzzed with an incoming message from Gwyn. "Elon, we need to talk." There's been another development. It's big. Elon's heart sank. Every time he received a message like this, he knew it wasn't good news. He excused himself from the meeting and quickly dialed Gwyn. "What's going on?" he asked. "We've just received intel from one of our satellite partners," she said, her voice tense. "There's been a significant spike in activity from some of the competitors. They've been watching us closely, and it looks like they're planning something major, something that could rival our Mars mission." Elon's mind raced. What kind of competition are we talking about? "We don't know yet, but they're moving fast. We might be looking at another race to Mars, one that could be much more complicated than we anticipated." The challenge had shifted. It was no longer just about sabotages or internal conflicts. Now, they had to contend with the prospect of a rival mission, one that might have more resources or different technology. Elon knew that SpaceX was far ahead in some areas, but he also knew that the game could change in an instant. "We need to accelerate," Elon said, a fire reigniting in his chest. "Keep me updated on everything. We can't let anyone steal this from us. We're not just building rockets, we're shaping the future." As he hung up the phone, Elon knew that the road ahead was going to be more complicated than ever. But he was ready for it. This new competition wasn't just a threat, it was the final test. If they could come out on top, nothing could stop SpaceX from becoming the leader in space exploration. But first, they needed to face the storm that was about to hit. The weeks to come would be defined by tension, competition, and the looming uncertainty of a rival mission. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but Elon Musk had never been one to back down from a fight. Now, with more at stake than ever before, he would need to lead his team through one of the toughest trials of their journey. And this time, there would be no turning back. The tension between SpaceX and their new competitors was palpable. Elon could feel it in every meeting, every conversation, and even in the very air around the SpaceX campus. The competition had come out of nowhere, an anonymous company with seemingly endless resources and a mysterious strategy that seemed to be moving faster than anyone had anticipated. It was a race, now. A race to Mars that neither company could afford to lose. But for Elon, the pressure felt different this time. In the past, SpaceX had always been the underdog. Now, they were at the top of the game, and everyone was gunning for them. If they stumbled, it wouldn't just be another failed mission, it could mean the end of their dominance in space exploration. For Elon, it wasn't just about winning the race. It was about proving something, that SpaceX was more than just a company. It was a testament to what humanity could achieve, and they dared to dream big. As the weeks passed, the competition grew fiercer. Elon's team worked around the clock, pushing boundaries and innovating at a pace that was both exhausting and exhilarating. Every time a new piece of technology came through or a test flight succeeded, the team felt a surge of optimism. But it was clear that SpaceX couldn't rest on their laurels. The new competitors were moving quickly, and every advantage SpaceX had earned could be quickly lost if they weren't vigilant. During one late-night strategy session, Gwyn spoke up, her voice sharp with concern. "Elon, we need to talk about the timeline. They're pushing hard, and they've already made major strides in propulsion technology. If we don't match them, we risk losing this race." Elon rubbed his temples, exhausted. "I know. We're doing everything we can, but the resources we need to get to the next stage are limited. We can't keep up this pace without sacrificing quality." Gwyn nodded, her expression grim. "I'm afraid the next phase will require a level of risk we haven't taken before. We're already on the edge of what we can handle. If we push too hard, we could burn out the team, or worse." Elon stared at the table for a long moment, the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. He had been through so much already, and the thought of failing now felt like a betrayal, not just to the team, but to the world. "We can't afford to let fear hold us back," he said finally, his voice firm. "I know the risks. But we're going to need everything we've got. This mission, this company, it's bigger than us. If we don't push, we're going to lose. And I'm not willing to let that happen. As SpaceX ramped up efforts to match their competitors' progress, Elon found himself working in overdrive. He was on the phone with government officials, strategizing with engineers, and leading team meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning. His entire focus was on the Mars mission, and yet, the personal toll was evident. His relationships with his team, which had started to heal, began to strain again as the demands of the mission intensified. There were whispers, quiet murmurs behind closed doors, about Elon's leadership style. Some people admired his vision, his relentless pursuit of success. Others, however, felt that he was pushing them too far, too fast. The pressure was becoming unbearable, and even those who had once been his staunchest supporters began to question if they could keep up with his demands. One afternoon, as Elon sat in his office reviewing the latest mission plans, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Gwyn. "Elon, we've just received intel. Our competitor's spacecraft is ready for launch ahead of schedule. They're going to be the first to attempt a crewed mission to Mars." Elon's pulse quickened. The other company was moving faster than anyone had expected. If they managed to launch a successful crewed mission to Mars before SpaceX, it would be a devastating blow, not just to their pride, but to their credibility. "This is it," Elon muttered under his breath. "The race is on." In the days that followed, SpaceX pushed forward with an even greater sense of urgency. The company worked relentlessly to finalize the spacecraft, ensure the systems were in place, and prepare the crew for the most dangerous journey humanity had ever attempted. Elon knew that the risks were astronomical, but there was no turning back now. The world was watching, and SpaceX couldn't afford to fail. But in the midst of all the chaos, something unexpected happened. Late one evening, as Elon stood in front of the SpaceX launch pad, watching the final tests for the rocket, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Gwyn standing beside him, her face tight with exhaustion. "Elon," she began quietly, "I've been thinking. We've pushed so hard to get here, but, are we still doing this for the right reasons? Are we doing it for the mission, or for the competition?" Elon's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? I know how important Mars is to you. I know you believe this is the key to humanity's future," Gwyn said, her voice soft but urgent. "But there's a part of me that wonders if we've lost sight of the real mission here. Are we racing just to win, or are we racing because it's what we truly believe in?" Elon stood in silence for a long moment, staring out at the rocket on the launch pad. He had been so focused on beating the competition, on proving something to the world, that he hadn't stopped to ask himself the same question. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I've lost sight of the people. The ones who have been with us from the beginning. I've been so obsessed with getting to Mars, with being the first, that I've forgotten the reason we're doing this. It's not about winning a race. It's about ensuring that the future of humanity is secure, that we're doing something that matters." Gwyn nodded, her face softening. "And that's why we need to be careful. We're pushing so hard that we might miss the bigger picture. It's not about who gets there first. It's about how we get there, and who we become along the way." Elon stood silently, the weight of her words sinking in. For so long, he had been consumed with reaching Mars, with getting there before anyone else. But in that moment, he realized that the mission was never just about the destination, it was about the journey. The people. The team. The lives they could change along the way. As the days ticked by, the pressure continued to build. SpaceX was ready for launch, but it was no longer just about the race. It was about making sure that, no matter the outcome, they had stayed true to their purpose. The mission to Mars wasn't just a conquest, it was the future of humanity. And Elon was ready to lead his team through whatever it took to make that future a reality. The countdown had begun. The day of the launch was drawing closer, and the tension inside the SpaceX headquarters was palpable. Elon had spent countless hours overseeing every detail of the mission, from ensuring the rocket was flawless to making sure the crew was ready for the dangers they would face. But now, with only hours left before the scheduled launch, the weight of everything that had come before felt heavier than ever. The world was watching. It wasn't just the journalists or the billionaires who had invested in the company. It was everyone, the curious onlookers, the hopeful dreamers, the skeptics who had doubted that humans could ever reach Mars. They were all waiting to see if SpaceX could really pull it off. But Elon couldn't allow himself to get lost in the hype. This mission was about far more than just proving people wrong or winning a race. He had made peace with the fact that the competition, while fierce, was never truly the end goal. What mattered now was something much deeper: the future of humanity, the legacy of SpaceX, and the next step toward establishing a permanent human presence on another planet. The night before the launch, Elon stood once again in front of the towering rocket. The massive structure gleamed under the night sky, its powerful engines, sleek design, and intricate details all symbolizing the culmination of years of work, setbacks, breakthroughs, and personal sacrifice. He'd spent so many sleepless nights obsessing over every facet of the project, pouring his heart into it. It had been grueling, and yet, in this moment, standing alone in front of the rocket, he felt oddly calm. Gwyn approached him, her footsteps echoing across the quiet launch pad. "You okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Elon glanced over at her and smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Just thinking." "About the mission?" she asked, her gaze following his. "No," he replied. "About what comes next." The days leading up to the launch had been filled with endless simulations, last-minute adjustments, and a growing sense of anticipation. But now, as the crew prepared for the final check and the countdown clock began ticking down, there was no more room for second-guessing or doubt. The pressure was enormous, but it was also what made moments like these so thrilling. As the crew climbed aboard the spacecraft and strapped into their seats, Elon stood in the Mission Control Center, a few feet away from the giant screen that would broadcast their journey into space. He could see the tension in the faces of his team members as they checked and double-checked every system. He'd seen them at their best and worst, when they worked together like a well-oiled machine, and when things seemed to fall apart under the pressure. But today, there was a sense of unity, of collective purpose that made everything feel possible. The countdown clock reached the final 10 seconds, and a quiet silence fell over the control room. Every eye was locked on the monitors. The engineers, the astronauts, the managers, they all knew how high the stakes were. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket engines roared to life, and with a deafening blast of sound and force, the spacecraft began its ascent into the heavens. For a moment it was all just pure energy, the power of human innovation, the collective will to explore and push boundaries. And then, the rocket broke through the atmosphere. Elon watched as the spacecraft climbed higher, his heart racing with a mixture of pride and fear. This wasn't just the culmination of SpaceX's work. This was the culmination of everything humanity had been striving toward for centuries. The dream of space travel was no longer just a fantasy, it was reality. In the hours that followed, the tension remained high. Every data point was carefully monitored, every system watched like a hawk. As the spacecraft moved further away from Earth, the crew on board began to settle into their routine, though the gravity of what they were doing was never far from their minds. For Elon, however, the real moment of relief wouldn't come until they were safely in orbit, far from the reach of Earth's atmosphere, and the mission was truly underway. But as they passed through the final stages of launch, it became clear, they were making history. As the spacecraft reached its final trajectory toward Mars, Elon stood alone in the quiet of the control room, watching the live feed. He'd always been the one at the forefront of every venture, but today felt different. Today, it wasn't about him. It was about the thousands of people who had dedicated their lives to making this moment possible. Gwyn entered the room, taking a seat beside him. "We did it," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Elon didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the live feed of the rocket in flight. It wasn't the loud cheers or the public recognition that mattered right now, it was the knowledge that, for the first time, humanity was on the brink of something far bigger than anyone had ever imagined. For SpaceX, the journey had only just begun. They had made it to space. But Mars? Mars was just the next chapter in a story that Elon knew would stretch far beyond his lifetime. The challenge ahead was monumental, but so was the potential. Meanwhile, back at SpaceX headquarters, the atmosphere was one of awe and jubilation. There was no doubt that this mission was a huge success. Just getting to this point was a remarkable feat, but for Elon and his team, the real challenge still lay ahead. The next steps were even more dangerous, and the unknowns were vast. What would they find on Mars? Could they establish a sustainable presence? These were the questions that would define the next phase of SpaceX's mission, and they couldn't be answered yet. But one thing was certain, SpaceX had taken the first giant leap. As the spacecraft continued its journey toward Mars, Elon stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The stars were shining brightly above him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would be difficult, but they had made it this far. They had proven that space exploration was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. With a deep breath, Elon gazed up at the sky, his heart swelling with pride and hope. The future was still unwritten, but the first page had been turned. And as the world watched, SpaceX was about to change everything. But deep in the shadows, their competitors weren't done yet. They were watching closely, waiting for their moment. The race was far from over, and with everything at stake, the next few months would determine the ultimate winner of humanity's greatest challenge yet. The race to Mars had just begun. The journey to Mars was in full swing. With the spacecraft traveling through the vacuum of space, Elon and the SpaceX team felt a sense of calm relief mixed with an undeniable anticipation. The launch had gone smoothly, and for the moment, there was nothing but the vast expanse of space stretching out before them. The crew was in good spirits, each one eager to see history unfold as they continued their mission. However, as the days wore on, the weight of what was still to come began to settle back into the team's consciousness. They weren't just crossing the boundary into outer space, they were preparing to land on a completely unknown planet. There was no roadmap for this, no guarantees. The risks, as Elon had known from the very beginning, were immeasurable. Still, his faith in SpaceX and the team was unwavering. He had always believed that it was the collective vision of a few brilliant minds, combined with unwavering determination, that would make the impossible possible. But as the spacecraft moved closer to Mars, an unexpected development emerged, something that no one could have predicted. It began with a routine check-in from Mission Control. Gwyn, Elon, and several top engineers were watching as data streamed in from the spacecraft. There were no signs of danger, no alarms going off, just the steady flow of information that had become their normal. Then, the communication line to the spacecraft went quiet. For a moment, everyone assumed it was a technical glitch, a temporary blip in the system. But the minutes ticked by, and the silence stretched longer. By the time an hour had passed without any response from the crew, a wave of panic began to ripple through the control room. "What the hell is going on?" Elon asked, his voice suddenly sharp with concern. He hadn't been this anxious since the early days of SpaceX when every launch felt like a gamble. But this was different. This was a fully operational mission with everything riding on it. Gwyn's face was pale as she sat at the control panel, furiously typing commands into the keyboard. "I don't know. I'm trying to reset the system, but the signals aren't coming through. The spacecraft is still on its trajectory, but I can't get a clear response from the crew." Elon's heart pounded. "Are we sure it's just a technical issue?" Gwyn shook her head slowly, her fingers trembling. "There's something else. It's almost like we're being deliberately blocked from communication." "But, that's impossible, right?" A cold shiver ran down Elon's spine. They had been facing competition from other companies, sure, but never had he considered the possibility of interference from someone else in the race. As time dragged on, the uncertainty began to weigh heavily on everyone in the control room. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, a new message flashed across the screen. It was a video transmission, but not from the spacecraft. Instead, it was from the competitors, the mysterious company that had come out of nowhere and had been a thorn in SpaceX's side for months. Elon watched in disbelief as the screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was that of a man Elon had never seen before, stern, calculating, and cold. His eyes fixed on the camera as he began speaking. "If you're watching this, Mr. Musk, then you already know the score. We've successfully infiltrated your communication systems. Your precious crew on the spacecraft will never make it to Mars. We've ensured that." Elon's jaw clenched. "What are you talking about?" he muttered, barely able to process what he was hearing. The man on the screen smiled, a smile that was too calm, too certain. "Oh, we've been watching you, Mr. Musk. You've been so focused on the mission, you didn't even notice the vulnerabilities in your systems. It's not just about beating you to Mars. It's about showing the world that we have the power to control the future. We'll get there first, your failure will be the spark that ignites our revolution." The room went silent, the implications of the message sinking in. SpaceX was being sabotaged, not by some random chance or natural failure, but by a rival company that had somehow infiltrated their systems. They had tampered with communications, and worse, they had intentionally put the crew's safety at risk. Elon's hands tightened into fists. He had always been prepared for competition, for setbacks, for challenges. But this was something far darker, something that was no longer about technology or space. It was about power, control, and a deliberate attempt to destroy everything he had worked for. "Gwyn," he said, his voice low and steady, "I need you to track down their location. Now. I want everything. The backup systems, the protocols, every resource we have. We're not just going to let this slide." Gwyn nodded, her face grim. "We'll do whatever it takes, Elon. But we need to act fast." Minutes felt like hours as the team scrambled to regain control of the mission. Engineers worked tirelessly to re-establish communication with the spacecraft while cybersecurity experts were brought in to track the source of the infiltration. The sense of betrayal hung in the air, but there was no time for distractions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the signal from the spacecraft came through again. The crew was alive. They were intact. But there was no time to celebrate, there were still dangerous unknowns ahead. Elon breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew that this was just the beginning. The sabotage attempt had been the opening salvo in a much larger battle, one that would force him to fight not just for Mars, but for everything SpaceX stood for. "We're not done yet," Elon said, turning back to Gwyn. "We're going to Mars. But this is going to get even harder. And I won't let anyone take that away from us. Not now. Not ever." With the crew still on their course to Mars, and SpaceX now fully aware of the sabotage attempt, the stakes had been raised higher than ever before. It wasn't just about space exploration anymore, it was about the survival of their mission, the survival of their dream. The world was watching, but now, so were the enemies who would stop at nothing to ensure they failed. As Elon stood in front of the mission control board, the weight of the challenge pressing down on him, he knew one thing for certain: this mission would be the most important battle of his life. The countdown to Mars was no longer just a race against time, it was a fight for the future. And SpaceX would not be the one to lose. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?